important thing is, I think, that the country lawyers have to work for what they get. The fact that the debate and the argument and the evidence took place in Nuremberg was the setup of a court system. Jesus was tried in Jerusalem, wasn't he? Before Pontius Pilate. He was the judge. In Nuremberg, we had judges from England, France, Russia, and the United States. That didn't make any difference in the judgment. And secondly, we're trying this man Milosevic, I think, in The Hague, or maybe it's in Yugoslavia. If the evidence shows he's guilty, what's the difference where they try him? In other words, as long as the procedures are fair and honest and courteous, and by fair I mean the defense has a right to put in its case too. In your paper this morning and on television, they show you this man from the South who was just sentenced to life imprisonment for the killing of the 4 black girls. He's been free for a long time. But now he's been convicted yesterday by what? A jury of his peers, right? After a fair trial. We've had those in Jamestown, haven't we? We've had them in Buffalo, we've had them in Binghamton, we've had them in New York City, and we've had them all over the world. We had them at Nuremberg. People forget that a couple of people were acquitted at Nuremberg. You remember that?
I wasn't there. But.
Oh, I'm sure you weren't, but...
I saw the special, so I know that you were acquitted.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't make any difference where you're born. It's, listen carefully, it's how your mother brought you up, man. And Bob Jackson's mother had a great influence on him. But the important thing is, and his father and his relatives taught him the value of fairness and honesty and fundamental decency, and something which we dearly need among young men and women today in the trial courts. It starts with C, called civility. That we're lacking, and we need to get it back.
Are those attributes the kind of drew you to Jackson to study him and what he did and how he came from here and got to Nuremberg and did what he did?
It wouldn't make any difference to me if he had been from Binghamton or Nova Scotia or from Brooklyn even, where I was from as a baby. I got out when I was 3 years old. But in any case, those attributes don't depend on geography. They depend on training and education and the person's own value system.
So the kind of person Jackson was what fascinated you the most?
Of course, you look up to people, and I sat on a stage in Atlantic City and saw him make his speech there, and I said, gee, there's something about this man I like. And I think a lot of people felt the same way. He was a real human being who was honest, who gave the impression that he was fair to both sides. By the way, he wasn't wishy-washy, but he was fair to both sides. And well, let's see what the other side has to say first before we make up our mind kind of fellow. And I admired that. I admire that.
Do you think the recognition that he's starting to get around this area, and I know recently, just a couple of years ago, they had the statue downtown, and do you think this is long overdue?
Oh, that's blaming us for something that didn't happen, the rest of it. I wouldn't blame Jamestown for not erecting a statue right away. I remember, Lorraine, we were talking with Jackson one day, and he said, it's too early to write my biography. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And he said, you got to wait till the life is over before you could really judge it. He's saying yes with his head. He believes that, and I do too. Jackson already said it to me, and I think that's true. But at the same time, you can see which way things are moving, can't you? And if a person has a lot of good records in law and education, as he did, and in trials, you think it's moving in the right direction. They ought to make some records on these guys. And that's true of a lot of people. Not just true of lawyers, it's true of Winston Churchill, for example. He was at the bottom of his class. Winston Churchill was in school. They said, gee, this guy will never be anything. And he turned out to be the leader of the free world. If you won't remember it because you weren't born then. Read his book. The English-speaking people, you should have it in your library, Anne. He also tells how to write. Did you know that?
No, but I'll...
See that? Lorraine will have to correspond with Anne and give her some good, how to write. He said, I was in this professor's class for 3 years. He's not a bright student, was he? But he said, but the advantage was I got into my system the fundamental principles of a British sentence, which is a noble thing. Yeah.
One thing I got from your book today was when you mentioned that Robert Jackson said he wasn't sure that a biography of him would be appropriate.
No, he
at
didn't
that
say it
point,
wouldn't be appropriate
until he was,
until he died.
I think his life was over. And
You get
it
the
said,
long view then.
but I would not want to encourage the belief that it would have either wide or permanent value when he responded to your request. And
Yeah.
obviously his life has had wide and permanent value. Did you believe at that time it would have wide and permanent value, or were you just hoping to get in on something
Let
early?
me say it this way. What I knew instantaneously at the time he said that, I don't know. I know I didn't agree with him. But here was a man who came from the same state that I was born in, New York, and who had a fine record in the law. At that time, he'd already been at Nuremberg. And that was the first world trial of criminals who were committing crimes against humanity, against all of you. And if you're going to have any kind of a system, you're either going to have a system like Milosevic and the Serbians run, or you're going to have, or Hitler ran, or you're going to have some kind of a system that's based on law which people accept. If, Rain, one of our articles I wrote, I used a quotation from John Locke. I think it was in the Ross essay. It says, where there is no law, there is no freedom. It's from his book on education. It's in my book on Quote It. You'll find it. I try to cite things so people can go back and get it and figure whether I interpreted it the same way they do. But if you don't have law, what have you got? You got the biggest guy with the biggest fist, and Milosevic had a big fist. There's bullying going on in school. Are the little guys that look like what you'd call wimps, are they running the school? No. Some guy with a big fist is running it. So power is important, but power has to be regulated. And you do that by a law that's agreed law, and which is interpreted by independent judges. And Jackson saw to it that the Nuremberg trials judges were independent. So did the British. It wasn't just Jackson alone who did it. He helped to negotiate and sign the American commitment to that trial and tried it. But the British also did. The British are a very fair people. No? The answer is, I thought what he had done was so important that it ought to be fully documented and fully recorded, and it was. Right?
Is there one contribution from Mr. Jackson that stands out in your mind over anything else?
One contribution? I wouldn't want to divide his contributions up into relative importance. You know, it's not a grocery list. It's not an x-ray. It's a contribution of his life. And to me, the great contribution of his life and is he can be a country lawyer from Jamestown, New York, and do your job and be recognized by your fellow citizens and by your fellow lawyers, by your people, as being what? Honest, a hard worker, and standing for the right values, you know? You know, there's a great expression, and I don't say this to be religious about it, but some of you may be Lutherans. I only mention it because of what I'm about to say. What did Martin Luther say that everybody quotes when the church was saying, don't do that, recant, take back what you said? He said, hier stehe ich kann nicht anders, Gott helpe mir, Amen. Now what did he mean by that? You know what he meant. He said, here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. God help me. Amen. Now, they didn't kill Luther when he said that. They were afraid to, probably. But in any case, that's where Jackson felt. He stood for things. And he stood by them. His fight with black was based on principle, and I admire Jackson's standing for principle. My father was a Republican, but he wasn't a hack. And so I was raised to respect Calvin Coolidge, and Woodrow Wilson was too liberal and all that sort of thing. Those were family values that Dad had. He was working for a big company. But the point is, people absorb a lot of what they get from their family and their training. And my opinion is that Jackson absorbed the right values from his training. And I wouldn't want to pick just one thing out and say that was the great thing that he did, you know. He knew Churchill. He admired Churchill's courage. You ever read the history of the English-speaking people? Anne should read that, yeah. Written by Winston Churchill, the greatest writer of the first half of, pardon?
Oh, I will. I always have a book going.
Okay, go after Winston. He'll tell you how to write a book. It's in the first or second volume of his work. That's Winston Churchill. He'll be a great help to you, Anne. He was the greatest writer of the first half of this century, in case you didn't know it. Look him up in Time magazine. There's a lot of, right, Terry? Terry's a little older than you, I can tell. Then he's shaking his head. He knows
the grade was given away.
But the important thing is everybody looks for a talisman, you know, a ring. Jackson wore his grandfather's watch, you know, band. You see it in these pictures. There might have been a sentimental reason for his doing that, you know? And he got inspiration from it. A lot of us get inspiration from rosary or from other things, lockets around your neck, you know, and so forth. So to take one and say that's it, I think that's arrogating to me too big a power of selection, and I wouldn't want to do it, and I don't really believe it's true. I think he was a combination of things. Lorraine, we left that man, Greg Landon. I got a letter from a GI, whom I know intimately. He wrote me a letter last week, and it's over in the hotel room, man. And in it, he said, I've just finished reading your Jackson book. And he ended up by saying, thank you for writing it. He said, I learned a great deal more about the man than I ever knew. I just thought he was a judge, you know. But he read it and he found out he was a lot more than that. And this man's name was Landon. His father was a lawyer. His brother is a Florida lawyer. And He's a bright guy. He got 2 Purple Hearts in Vietnam, so he knows what it's like to take a couple, you know. And he thanked me for writing Jackson's book, and he liked it. So he, of course, has a copy of it. But I think it's important to realize that Jackson appeals to people not only who were GIs who were wounded in war, but who stood for something, right? And I think it's important that we stand for something.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is one quote from your book I thought was interesting. Jackson knew the average American as a practical fellow who wants a system that works.
Who wants to what?
A system that works.
Sure.
And this was in the context of free speech
Right.
and freedom of the press.
Right.
And Jamestown is full of average folk. What can the people in Jamestown who are not lawyers get from Jackson Center?
The wisdom of that statement, for one thing. They're practical people, aren't they? What should the people in Jamestown do? Copy the best that they can find in Jackson, and people like him, and others, and they'll come out in the end all right.
Mr. Gerhart, thank you very much.
Right, that's the end. Did you hear that word there, Ann? Right? That's a very nice statement.
Isn't it though?
That isn't it. Who came up with that?
That might be Masonic, you know?
You might be right. I think Bill Jackson talked about it when they dedicated the statue.
Right, it might be from his speech. Miss Gerhart came from Albany. She was the daughter of a contractor, but we haven't traced to her any direct lineage to our Gerharts who landed in Philadelphia. So we'll find out later.
Why did you eliminate the D?
Because the British spelled Hart, H-A-R-T, and they were writing down the names of the immigrants.
And they're doing the
So
job.
that's why they used to call them the dumb Dutch. They couldn't speak English. It means the silent Dutch, see? It wasn't that they were ignorant, that they were silent. What is your name, sir? They would shrug their shoulders. It's all written up by our friend from Philadelphia, that guy who was a school teacher. Final resting place. He's not buried here.
It's in Maple Grove, which is where we were.
Right. Final resting, Maple Grove Cemetery.
The whole thing.
Bother anybody if I hold it?